next speaker is Pierre Trudeau, is President and CTO of Positron Access Solutions. He'll be discussing leveraging legacy wiring in brownfields MDU. But this is an important perspective given that, as indicated earlier, two-thirds of the rental unit stock is composed of brownfield units. So, floor is yours, Pierre. Welcome.
So thank you, Adlan, and thank you, everyone. We'll cover quickly how managed Wi-Fi is possible in brownfield MDUs. Is it a challenge? To some extent, but we can address that. So managed Wi-Fi is critical. We've seen all the benefits and advantages, but in order to get managed Wi-Fi to an extent in a brownfield MDU, one of the challenges, can you get connectivity to that brownfield MDU? And what we see is, despite the rush to deploy millions of fiber miles across the US and other markets, oftentimes these brownfield MDUs have fiber right there in front of the building. You can see it. The tenants saw that the crew deployed the fiber, but when it comes time to get connected, because it's a brownfield MDU, bringing fiber to every door is a problem. So that stifles the ability to provide not only adequate bandwidth, but more importantly, manage Wi-Fi. So earlier, Adlan kind of mentioned some stats. Less than 10% of recent or greenfield MDUs have managed Wi-Fi, which isn't that bad, but it's less than 1% in brownfield MDUs, which is still the larger part of the market. And according to the most recent census data from the US government, over 25% of the US population lives in MDUs. And that tends to be the younger crowds, the ones that probably use a lot more of the internet. And what we see in other markets, like in Europe and Asia, it can be as high as 70% in the urban areas, the larger cities. And all that, as I said before, it's because there is no suitable in-building gigabit Ethernet infrastructure. And without that, there's no managed Wi-Fi. So let's find out how we can take care of that and what I would qualify as 3 simple steps. Number 1 is make sure that you leverage this fiber that is right there in front of the buildings to provide gigabit Ethernet connectivity in these brownfield MDUs without any construction work. Just reuse the existing coaxial cabling or the telephone pairs. Now we hear people say, well, my coax is bad, the telephone pairs were installed ages ago. G.hn is the solution that we're using, and we'll cover that quickly. It does provide gigabit Ethernet in all of those scenarios. Once we have that, we eliminate what I would have called the fiber divide, where fiber is right there in front of the building, but not used or deployed properly inside the building. And then you can have managed Wi-Fi. Without that proper connectivity to the building, there's no managed Wi-Fi that is possible. And also, although we center or focus mostly on fiber, we see an increasing number of fixed wireless, mostly millimeter wave technology deployments used to connect MDUs in markets where fiber is not yet ready and may not be ready for quite a number of years. So what is G.hn? It's an ITU-T standard. So it's an international standard, the same standards that define the fiber standards. Wi-Fi is more with the IEEE, and it's been around for a little while. The current version is called Wave 2, oftentimes, and it provides 1.7 gigabit of aggregate bandwidth to customers. When we say aggregate, sometimes people say, well, is it symmetrical? It delivers gigabit speeds in either direction based on the actual demand from the subscribers. And that sum of demand can reach 1.7 gigabits. I was at Fiber Connect last week. There were some interesting reports, and despite gigabit speeds being available, the typical rate is more like 40 to 50 megabits, and the peak usage by a given subscriber is about 300 megabits. That's when they got the gaming going and the video conferencing and massive downloads of content and so on. So there's still a lot of bandwidth out there that is kind of not used. So having a gigabit to each and every apartment, every living unit is more than adequate. And interestingly, you get more distance for gigabit Ethernet over telephone wiring with the two pairs that we find in most MDUs today for every apartment, we get 250 meters or 800 feet of connectivity. And if we do it over coax, the RG6 coax that is installed by the cable provider some times ago still delivers a gigabit at 800 meters. So 8 times the distance of structured wiring. And there's no work to be done. There's no physical changes to the network in place inside the MDU to leverage these technologies. And if you have an MDU with older coax, we still do a gigabit at 300 meters over 1,000 feet on cheap RJ59. So the number 3 is let's not only use have fiber activated to the MDU. Is if you're a broadband service provider or whether it's you're a telco or a cable operator, if as increasingly everyone is deploying XGS-PON to serve areas where you can have a single family home, where you can have an MDU, the idea is that with G.hn or G.hn access multiplexer, or what we call a GAM, you can appear as basically an Ethernet switch to some extent, so an ONT that has a multitude of Ethernet ports, but they're all provisioned from the core network of the telecom operator as if it was a stack of individual fiber connections. So if you as a building owner or an MSP collaborate with a service provider, you can now get the best of both worlds where you can have the same services as the neighbors in the single family home get and deliver that connectivity to every elements, every areas of your property. And then it turns back into a regular gigabit Ethernet with PoE plus ports, so you can easily deploy Wi-Fi where you need to get it. But what's important is the seamless flow-through provisioning, and that's very useful to complement the self-activation, the ability to have the connectivity ready for when the tenant moves into the property. And I was monitoring the Q&A, and there was a question about what if I want to have multiple service providers into an MDU? Well, G.hn can be used and is being used with open access providers. So they provide the fiber to the property, and then they let multiple operators, multiple service providers to offer their access service over the same physical fiber plant. And then the tenants have a choice of 2, 3 service providers with different packages, different set of options that fits their requirements, their budgets, their preferences. So in doing this, not only do you have seamless connectivity, seamless management and activation with the service provider, you get the full Ethernet connectivity with bandwidth and performance of profiles so that you have this personal VLANs that follows devices as you move about the property. They also are managed as part of the same bandwidth profile. So you don't have to worry about the bandwidth that everyone gets. It's the same profile as when you are inside your apartment. And obviously, you can do the same thing with fixed wireless. Today, we see a lot of fixed wireless that is based on 5G. 5G is a great technology, no questions, but it's kind of victim of its own success. Operators like Verizon, T-Mobile especially have made a killing where about 80% of new subscribers are based on fixed 5G. That's kind of a placeholder and an early solution until they have millimeter wave 1 to 10 gigabit solutions where they can leverage the 5G towers that have been deployed everywhere. They have fiber there, they have power, and they can put these higher speed radios that do not overlap with the 5G mobile network. And they can deliver 1 to 10 gig, point-to-point or point-to-multipoint to different buildings, and then we still leverage the same existing infrastructure in the building to deliver the bandwidth and have the backbone Ethernet to support adequate managed Wi-Fi. So if we look at the 3 steps again, first is make sure that you have this connectivity that is right in front of the legacy MDUs. So where it's not easy to bring fiber inside the unit or use fixed wireless, but do it properly. Don't try to have fixed wireless with 5G where depending on which side of the building you're in, you get good or bad service. make sure you can extend that broadband fiber directly inside the MDU and use the legacy wiring and going that with whatever the provisioning, the activation of the service provider all along the way. In doing this, we open a first door, which is gigabit to each tenant. And once you have that, then you're now ready to deploy and operate a managed Wi-Fi service across any portion of your MDU. And now you've opened the second door, which is managed Wi-Fi into the brownfield MDUs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pierre. Excellent presentation.